because I just had a mentorship call where we explained exactly this, and a few people got upset that I called this demographic elderly. So we agreed on the term chronologically challenged. And the way that I would work with these individuals is to teach them how to perform strength training. So actually, I worked with a new member of my VIP group the other day who's going through menopause, and she was very concerned about her health and her training. And she said to me, she has once upon a time trained for fitness competition, and she actually looks great. And when she tells people she's going to train, a lot of her peers and her group say to her, "Why do you need to train? You already look amazing." And having to explain to these individuals that training isn't just about how she looks. Training is not just about being thin, which is what a lot of people think it's about. This is what we need to remember. The majority of the world actually don't train. So we're kind of like, we're in our community, in our little bubble of people that training is essentially life, right? It's kind of like brushing your teeth. You got to do that. Training in the gym, you got to do that. But the majority of the world don't train. So people think you train so that you can get thin, for example. Like that's a very common thing that people think is that's the only reason you go to the gym. So they looked at her and said, "Why do you need to train? You're already so thin. You look great." Okay, it's because I want to feel good. I want to live longer. I want to be healthy. And I've got, so menopausal women, going through, osteoporosis and needs to use whatever she can to improve her bone mineral density. So the best tool for that is resistance training. But what type of resistance are we talking about? It's actually not the type of resistance that a lot of people use, which is really low loads and high reps. Yeah, that's resistance training, but actually that's going to have little to no impact on your bone mineral density. So what does have impact on your bone mineral density? Heavy loads. How heavy? 1 to 5 rep range heavy is how heavy. You need to actually load your body. Okay, but what problems are we going to run into when you have your new, say, for example, 60-year-old client that comes to you and hasn't trained and has been diagnosed with, osteoporosis and needs to improve their bone mineral density? Do you just come to that individual and say, well, now I know that 1 to 5 rep range is your optimal zone? No, that individual, for those who know what it feels like to be lifting those loads, you know that you need to learn and teach your body how to handle those loads. So although they might be the optimal reps to use to improve your bone mineral density, you can't start there. You need to learn how to handle those loads. You need to learn the lifting techniques so that you can gradually increase the weight on your body. So how do we do this? This is where we talk about the fundamentals of periodization. The first thing you need to do is learn how to move on these fundamental movement patterns. Except that this phase, you're not building muscle, you're not losing fat, you're not improving your bone mineral density. You are learning how to move. And this is going to be a great investment for the future of your training. So learning how to move, you don't really work that hard either. Okay, when you work hard, there's a risk of technical breakdown, and that's not what you want, especially if you've got no training experience. Okay, so don't train so hard that you're breaking down technique, which means that's right. Like to build muscle, you need to train pretty hard. Okay, so that's not the objective here. You probably won't sweat. You're probably not going to get that much muscle soreness. You're probably not going to build that much muscle, but that's okay. You need to lay those foundations of movement literacy. Okay, so after we've got a decent understanding, it doesn't mean you have to have perfect technique. Okay, because there's no such thing as perfect. We work towards it, but never achieve it. Okay, so understanding that the technique needs just to be good enough to be able to move forward to the next phase, which is to slowly introduce work capacity. So eventually we want to be increasing the volume so that increasing the volume as well as increasing the effort that we apply to our training so that we can do great things such as building muscle mass. You need significant amount of volume and effort to build muscle mass. So then we go from a movement phase, which is low intensity and low volume, to a work capacity and a muscle building phase, which is where we gradually increase the volume and increase the level of effort that we apply. What does level of effort mean? How close to failure we train. Okay, quite often we use terms like RPE and RIR. So for the ease of this discussion, I'll say RIR, reps in reserve. So how close to failure? So failure is 0 RIR. You don't need to train that hard to elicit a muscle gain or strength gain response. Okay, a lot of great research shows us that actually leaving a few reps in reserve, how many? 0 to 3 reps in reserve is a pretty decent zone that you can still not train to fail, but still build muscle and build strength. The benefits of not going to absolute fail is, one, you're avoiding technical breakdown. So usually when you go to fail, this is when form breaks down. It's not the end of the world, but at the same time, we kind of want to avoid that. But another reason why we want to avoid training to failure is fatigue. You might get a really great set if you train to failure, but then this will negatively impact the consecutive sets. Okay, so your first set might be really good, and then the second set, you can't do as many reps. You can't train as hard. And then each set after that gets, increased fatigue and decreased quality of reps. So therefore, the solution to this is use less, use some reps in reserve. 1 to 3 reps in reserve is a nice zone. But when I go more further into program design and I talk about how many reps in reserve, I like to cycle the effort, periodize the effort. And at various phases, we have more reps in reserve and then gradually get closer and closer to fail. And then I like to cycle that, which I can talk about later on. But for the purpose of this, teaching the individual how to handle work capacity and training effort so they can build muscle. So we do this with higher reps, and then gradually we can then introduce strength building phases where we are using, 3 to 5 rep ranges for this demographic. So I said 1 to 5 rep range is a really great way of increasing bone mineral density, but actually 1 rep and 2 rep probably isn't the best. Okay, so 1 and 2 rep range for muscle building is a very low amount of volume. You're not going to get a huge amount of stimulus, but you are potentially getting a large amount of fatigue. So it's not the best rep range to use. So when I talk about, back to the term, the chronologically challenged, or women who are menopausal, when we're working towards the goal of improving our bone mineral density, I'd say that 3 to 5 rep range of our great compound movements are a really nice zone to be working towards. But as I said, I would probably be training this individual for multiple phases before we get to that strength phase. So I would say a great sweet spot is training for about 3 months of high volume movement rep ranges, where we're mastering the technique, building work capacity, building muscle, 3 months of that before we start exploring the 3 to 5 rep range. In 3 months, we can learn a great amount of how hard our body can push, how much effort to apply, and great techniques that we can use for these 3 to 5 rep range.